the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
One thing that God has done, He has put us in the midst of this world, all the turmoil and turbulence of this world. He puts us in the midst of it, and He doesn't want us to run to some mountaintop and hide away from what's going on in the world. He, in the Great Commission, said, I want you to spread the gospel and spread it everywhere. You can't do that when you're hiding. And so in order to spread the gospel, you have to understand the gospel. And that's why we do the studying here. And in order to spread the gospel today, you have to know what's going on today. And that's called In the Current Events. And we have a section that Marvel has mastered. And it's called The Gap News. She keeps you updated on things going on in the world. There's always something going on in the world. So, it's always amazes me how she, what she picks to show you. But it's always a good thing. Marvel, you ready?
Okay, so this Gap News has a whole life of its own now, because it's always something going on in America. It's always something going on in the world that we can share with you. So this time I said, we're talking about Christians and politics. We're Christians. Should we be involved with politics? Should we not be involved with politics? I mean, you can make your own decision on that. But I wanted to share with you some information that you might want to know about as you're making your decision about voting. Some people have already voted. God bless you. But if you have not made your decision yet, here's some information about, you might want to know about when you're making your decision about who to vote for the president.
We have the greatest military in the world, but you have to know how to use them. You have to know how to use them. But I protect you against outside enemies. But I always say, we have the outside enemy, so you can say China, you can say Russia, you can say Kim Jong-un, you can say, but that's not, it's going to be fun. If you have a smart president, no problem. It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
The desire to use the U.S. military against American citizens.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Well, the breaking news of the day went from breaking news to a presidential campaign ad in record time, with the Harris for President campaign setting a new speed record today in converting breaking news into a campaign ad.
And I talked to Putin a lot. I got along with him well. And I know Putin so well. I'd like to congratulate Vladimir Putin for having made yet another great deal. Did you see the deal we made?
Talk to him like that?
Oh, no, I had a very good relationship. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I'm trying to tell people, no, it's a good thing. When you see Putin and you see all of these people, they're at the top of their game. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have, I see. Yeah, but it takes two to tango,
The shocking breaking news of the morning is the biggest October surprise revealed this morning by the Washington Post would have crushed any presidential candidate prior to the Trump era and Donald Trump. The Washington Post reported this morning that Bob Woodward's new book, which will be published next week, titled War, reveals that in the darkest hour of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, when there was no vaccine and when most people in the world, including most people in this country, could not obtain COVID tests, Donald Trump sent priceless COVID tests to Vladimir Putin for Vladimir Putin's personal use. The Washington Post's breaking news headline on this story this morning was, Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Putin during 2020 shortage, new book says. The Post reported, as the coronavirus tore through the world in 2020 and the United States and other countries confronted a shortage of tests designed to detect the illness, President Donald Trump secretly sent coveted tests to Russian President Vladimir Putin for his personal use. Putin, petrified of the virus, accepted the supplies but took pains to prevent political fallout, not for him, but for his American counterpart. He cautioned Trump not to reveal that he had dispatched the scarce medical equipment to Moscow, according to a new book by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward. Putin, according to the book, told Trump, I don't want you to tell anybody because people will get mad at you, not me. I don't want you to tell anybody. Donald Trump followed Vladimir Putin's advice and did not tell anyone. But that's exactly the kind of thing that doesn't stay secret forever when Bob Woodward is on the case. Vladimir Putin's intense fear of COVID-19 was on public display throughout the worst of the pandemic, with repeated photographs of Vladimir Putin sitting at the end of a comically long table, sometimes berating Russian generals at the other end of the table for their failures in his war in Ukraine. That, of course, is French President Macron, who was also once at the end of that table. The book is filled with other revelations about Donald Trump, including Bob Woodward's conclusion that Donald Trump was worse than Richard Nixon. Quote, these interactions between Trump and the authoritarian leader of a country at war with an American ally form the basis of Woodward's conclusion that Trump is worse than Richard M. Nixon, whose presidency was undone by the Watergate scandal exposed a half-century ago by Woodward and his Washington Post colleague, Carl Bernstein. The Washington Post quotes Bob Woodward writing in the book, Trump was the most reckless and impulsive president in American history and is demonstrating the very same character as a presidential candidate in 2024.
I worked in the Trump administration.
Never in a million years did I ever think that I'd be working in the White House with a president that didn't care about the American people.
He would suggest not giving disaster relief to states that hadn't voted for him.
I remember one time after a wildfire in California, he wouldn't send relief because it was a Democratic state. So we went as far as looking up how many votes he got in those impacted areas to show him these are people who voted for you. This isn't normal. The job of the president is to protect Americans, regardless of politics.
If Trump's elected again, there'll be no one to stop his worst instincts. You'll have yes men help him implement Project 2025's agenda. Unchecked power, no guardrails.
They will be serving one man.
Good evening to everybody. Today, the stock market closed at all-time record highs, which means that once again, Fox Business brought out the virtual fireworks.
Just clarified some very important issues about the banks coming up. Thank you, Gerard. Here we go, folks. It is a record close for the Dow Jones Industrials and another record close for the S&P 500. Green on the screen today, driven by the bank earnings. But as you know, next week, big news with earnings as well. So we'll see you.
The Fox Business celebration comes after another Rupert Murdoch-owned company published an article titled, J.P. Morgan calls it, the U.S. economy has made a soft landing. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the world's largest bank announced that the U.S. economy under President Biden has achieved what was once seen as impossible, a soft landing. Investopedia describes a soft landing as an economy that slows down a bit, in this case because the Fed has managed interest rates without triggering inflation or a recession. Pandemic-era inflation is way down, unemployment is low, job creation is high, and wages are growing, and no one is talking about a recession anymore. There are just 25 days until Election Day, and more than 4 million votes have already been cast. There's one person on this year's ballot who's been called fascist to the core by their top general, Donald Trump. The Independent reports, quote, that in Bob Woodward's forthcoming book, War, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said to Woodward, quote, he is the most dangerous person ever. I had suspicions when I talked to you about his mental decline and so forth, but now I realize he's a total fascist. He's now the most dangerous person to this country, he said. A fascist to the core, Milley repeated. I ask you to think about this for a moment. A former president being called fascist to the core by the man who was the most senior military officer in the country, serving under that very man. In a normal news world, this would be all everyone was talking about. But now we live in the Trump era. And so Donald Trump can tell a group of supporters in Colorado today that Americans who don't support him are the real enemy. And that's just part of Trump's election stump speech.
You know, I always say we have the outside enemy, so you can say China, you can say Russia, you can say Kim Jong-un, you can say, but that's not, it's going to be fun. If you have a smart president, no problem. It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
Today, Governor Walz kicked off a new push to win over male voters in battleground states. Here's what he said, flanked by hard hats in hometown of General Motors, Macomb County, Michigan.
He says we should just let China dominate the auto industry. But it's no surprise, Trump's all talk when it comes being tough on China. Some of you heard this. We just found out his Trump-branded Bibles. Yeah, they're printed in China. This dude even outsourced God to China. So just so we know. Again, I'm going to try and be generous here. I don't blame him. He didn't notice the Made in China sticker because they put it inside a place he's never looked in the Bible. So.
In Western Pennsylvania yesterday, the former President Barack Obama spoke directly to black men voters, urging them to show up for Kamala Harris.
You're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down? That's not acceptable.
And this week, the Harris campaign launched Hombres con Harris, a new initiative aimed at Latino men in battleground states. Yesterday, Vice President Harris answered questions from undecided Latino voters in Las Vegas during a Univision town hall, including this emotional one.
You and I have something in common. We both lost our mother. Oh. And I'm an American citizen, born to Mexican parents. They were here before I was even born. They've worked their whole lives. But with the way immigration laws change over time, I was only able to help my dad get his legal status squared away, but not my mom's. My mom passed away just 6 weeks ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And she was never, ever able to get the type of care and service that she needed or deserved. Sorry.
Take your time. Take your time.
So my question for you is, what are your plans, or do you have plans to support that subgroup of immigrants who have been here their whole lives, or most of them, and have to live and die in the shadows?
I'm so sorry for you.
Thank you.
You must remember your mother as she lived.
Mm-hmm.
I have enough of a feeling about your strength that it probably comes from her to know she would want you to remember her as she lived and not as she died, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. And, my mother came to the United States at the age of 19. She was by herself. Came alone by herself. She raised my sister and me, Maya. And I know what it is like to have a hardworking mother who loves you and to lose that. But I know that her spirit is alive. I know her spirit is alive. And will you tell me her name and let's speak her name?
Maria Dolores Figueroa.
Maria Dolores?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we speak her name, okay?
Yes.
All right.
Today, Vice President Harris campaigned in Arizona at an event organized by Republicans for Harris.
There's this kind of backward thinking coming from some folks that suggests that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of what we know, which is the real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. That's strength. But truly, but I mean that intentionally. It's not only good and right, that's strength. Because that's part of what is the perversion of what some people are suggesting. As though it is a sign of weakness to have empathy, to have some level of concern and care about the suffering of other people, and then take it upon oneself to do something about that. That is about lifting the condition of your fellow human being. There are forces at play that are making us as Americans, I think, call into question certain fundamentals that we've always taken for granted. That is part of our pride. Freedom. Freedom. Freedom from the government making decisions about a person's body, a woman's body. Freedom to just be. Freedom over matters of heart and home, I like to say. Fundamental principles around the importance of rule of law. Whether we should actually be concerned and have a question, a legitimate question, in an election for President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, of whether they will abide by the oath.
Now, while Vice President Harris is working to court anti-Trump Republicans, Donald Trump doesn't seem to want any new support, especially not in Michigan. According to recent polling, Vice President Harris is leading Donald Trump in Michigan 49-47. That is well within the margin of error. But that didn't stop Donald Trump from saying that the whole country would, quote, end up being like Detroit, end quote, if Kamala Harris wins. He said that in Detroit. Today, the Harris campaign released this ad.
They said we were dead.
Detroit waving the white flag, the city filing for bankruptcy.
That our best days were behind us. That living here is like
living in hell.
But you know what we said? We said, F that. We rebuilt ourselves. We looked out for each other, got our hands dirty, and put in the hard work. And this guy, he don't know anything about that. We are a city of winners, of up-and-comers, of builders, the Motor City. Bigger and better. Here, we believe in freedom. We don't bow down to nobody, and we never will. And so what Donald Trump doesn't understand, or care to learn, is that when he said,
our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president,
that he should be so goddamn lucky.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Vice presidential candidate Governor Tim Walz gave a response of his own in Michigan today.
Donald Trump was in Detroit, and he said, our whole country will end up being Detroit. You're going to have a mess on your hands. Well, look, I know you don't, that's not unexpected for him. That's exactly what he's going to do, tear down America. But if the guy would have ever spent any time in the Midwest, like all of us know, we'd know Detroit's experiencing an American comeback and renaissance. Look, I'm a Twins fan, and you whipped our ass. We know where this is. Detroit's there, so we know. City's growing, crime's down, factories are opening up. But those guys, all they know about manufacturing is manufacturing bullshit every time they show up. Every time they show up.
You know, you remember that movie? He said, "Can you understand the words coming out of my mouth?" You can listen to the words coming out of the mouth of each of our candidates. You can, and please excuse, some of these had some language that we don't normally use in our class, but can you hear those words coming out of their mouths? And like I said, I'm not trying to tell you how to vote or anything like that. I am encouraging you to make sure you vote. But honey, you got any opinions about the two sides of what you heard in this Gap News?
You know, you mentioned that I had a birthday. You know, I thank God for every year.
Yeah.
And, but what I've noticed over the years is that the older I get, the more emotional I get. When the lady was talking about her mother, and she was able to get rights for her father, but her mother, all through her life, was not able to get the rights, and she'd been here 30 years, and you know, it's if you think about that, what you have is a person who probably jumps every time the phone rings, or somebody knocks on the door, or whatever, worrying that this may be the time when they come to get her and tell her she has to leave the country, even though her daughter and her husband are there. What kind of life is that for anybody to live? And where's the justice in that? Where's the justice, as we talk about in Micah 6:8, whereby for some reason it takes 30 years in order to get your status together, and you're contributing to the country, you're not doing anything to violate laws and all that kind of thing, but for some reason justice doesn't come, and you say, now, is that right? No, it's not right. In no way, form, or fashion is it right. And the other thing that got me a little emotional was when I heard Kamala say that the strength of a leader is not who you put down. And that's all we ever hear from Donald Trump. It's who you lift up. And you can go one step further and say, you lift up those that need lifting up.
Yes.
Not those who are already up.
Right.
Which is what you see coming from him also. So the bottom line on it is that when I hear and see things like that, and I'm trying to decide who's the best person that I should expend my very valuable vote for, you know, I have to take that into account and not be fooled. I can't be fooled by somebody telling me to my face that I'm not seeing or hearing what I'm seeing and hearing.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Yes.
So that was it really affected me.
Well, you saw me get my tissue out because and I already, of course, I had already seen it. I put the daggone video together, but the difference between the two candidates is so stark. And so you can make up your own mind. You can make up your own mind. But I felt like that this was a really great way to show you the two options that you have. And I have to say, Sister Michelle, I'm going to put it up here. She said, wow, Love our Gap News. Minus the 4-letter words. They had, but I don't think we ever had that many 4-letter words in our whole class, but they jammed them in. But thank you, Sister Michelle, for your comment. And
I take those as just being the people trying to express to the extent of what they feel. You know, the truth about something.
Yeah.
You know, and you understand in our society that has effect. And so I'm not saying we should use it. You're not going to hear me use it.
No, me neither.
But it does show me how passionate people
are passionate
about their position.
Yeah, they are. They're passionate. So take this information, use it, or don't use it if you don't want to. But you've got the stark contrast, and so you can decide how you want to place your ballot. Anything else, honey?
You know, the only other thing I want to say is that and it didn't focus. It did. I guess it focused a little bit because they had Barack Obama on there talking to the men, black men. I keep hearing this about black men and all that. And one of the things they were saying is that black men may not want to vote for a woman. And you know, when you look up over history, there have been a lot of women that have been in charge of countries.
Oh,
you know?
yeah, for years.
Either as queens or prime ministers or presidents, or it hasn't happened here, okay? But if you think a woman can't handle that job, then you're wrong.
A woman raised you.
I mean, don't let that be the reason you don't vote, because you're building that on shaky ground.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's the last thing I got to say about it.
Okay.
Thanks
all right.
for the Gap News, though.
All right. That's all for Gap News today.